jump over to the presentation. Right on. So when Mark Gaffney talks about Eros, you guys can see my screen, yeah? Hopefully.
Yeah, I can see it, Dan.
Thanks, brother. So, you know, he talks about 12 faces of Eros, and my intention was there's 5 essential ones, and then we get into some other ideas and elements later on. I was going to work on introducing those 5 essential faces of Eros today, a little around context and where these things matter, and we'll just kind of fly through it from there. So 5 essential faces of Eros. You know, what is Eros? And the way Mark Gaffney describes Eros is that experience of, you know, radical aliveness. And when he talks about seeking, you know, desire and ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness, what he's really talking about is like when we connect with life, with human experience, with others, with that real quality of Eros, that beautiful, deep human connection, that deep contact, you know, we get to know a greater and deeper level of ourselves. And so it's this reciprocal loop that is a, you know, radical experience that continues to fuel itself. And as I get through some of the other elements, you might understand why. And another thing I wanted to explore is like, well, you know, why do we need this? And when Mark Gaffney talks about what's missing in and he says, he uses the word erotic a lot, not in a sexual way, but just living life, you know, in the fullness of Eros. And what he sees out there is, you know, many lives were spent, you know, teetering around this void, like that emptiness that we feel inside, that oftentimes we're looking to fill with what he calls pseudo Eros, but things outside of us, things like drugs, things like alcohol, things like, it could be healthier, seemingly healthier addictions, you know, work or other types of things. But a lot of these things really are, when you look at them very closely, being uncomfortable with that emptiness or that void, and we're just trying to distract ourselves or to avoid that reality. And so we have this dance of, you know, consumerism, addiction, empty sex, violence, whatever it is at the end of the day, that is this inability to really sit in the emptiness, in the void, until it meaningfully starts to fill on its own. And I think we can all align with this in our own lives, and we see it happening, you know, all of the time to different degrees. And his I guess thesis or idea is that, you know, we really need to bring Eros back into the way that we live and experience our human lives, and we'll get into some of those examples. And as I just said, you know, if we can sit with that emptiness, that void long enough, it starts to fill. But the reality is, you know, many people are really uncomfortable with that, and this goes back to time immemorial. When you look at, you know, the Garden of Eden, you know, they couldn't sit there long enough. He had to try, you know, the forbidden apple, and then they wouldn't even take responsibility. You know, Adam blamed it on Eve, and Eve blamed it on the serpent. So they were banished from that Garden of Eden, that ability to exist in Eros forever, and they just couldn't sit there long enough, you know, to feel that and to live that. And he uses that analogy, which is an interesting one. And so, you know, this is his language, and I put it in quotations for that reason. Sometimes you are better just to reproduce what they say and not try to paraphrase. But, you know, what's the invitation here? And you know, keeping the concept that sexuality or the idea of sex is such a small portion of Eros, and that will become more obvious as we get deeper into this. But it's an invitation to, you know, to be a great lover in every aspect of life, right? You know, to be radically alive with passion in every dimension, with our food, you know, with our relationships, you know, with what we do for work, with what we do in our, you know, day-to-day lives, you know, to be engaged, which ultimately is being holy at the end of the day, you know, to live in that experience of yearning force of being, and it's just a real fullness of life, a fullness of being fully human. And it's also being connected, you know, to that beautiful universe, that radical interconnectivity he talks about, and I'll get into that in a little more detail as well. And so that's the invitation that Mark Gaffney kind of lays out. So today we're going to go through the 5 essential faces of Eros. The first being interiority, we're living on the inside. The second being fullness of presence. You know, the third being yearning and desire. And we've got the fourth, which is wholeness and interconnectivity, and the fifth, which is about uniqueness, right? That uniqueness and identity. And so we'll get into each of these elements. I'll share some ideas, you know, some topics, and hopefully we can talk about this in a little greater depth later on. So when we talk about interiority, this is a beautiful quote: what lies behind us and what lies before us, the past, the future, whatever, are tiny matters compared to what lies, within us. And this is a beautiful quote by Ralph Emerson about that interiority concept, which will become more obvious in a few slides here. So, what is that? Living on the inside. And although sex is something that is such a small portion of Eros, and it certainly doesn't exhaust Eros, because sex, I think, can take people to a place where they get glimpses of some of these emotions or some of these states of being. Really, it's helpful to understand. Sex is obviously for a man being on the inside, of a woman, but we often see how in that kind of beautiful space we can really lose ourselves in the experience. We can really merge with the experience. And so what that tells us in life is that, if we can experience life and the other elements of life that we, more frequently encounter than sex, really doing that on the inside, really almost forgetting our separateness, forgetting ourself, and really merging with the experiences that we're having. And that's really what he's talking about. So deeply moving into what we do or who we are with or where we are at, that stirs our heart, our passion, our imagination, not being worried about what am I going to make for dinner, or when are we going to get there? Are we there yet? Or, there's all these things happening in the moment that we have the opportunity and the ability to move deeply into, and to have, an erotic experience with. And how are we doing that? And I always think about food, right? There's such an opportunity with food, to experience the smell and the visuals and, texture and taste and so many other elements. And how often are we just, mindlessly eating on the run, right? Like, it's a small example of an opportunity, and there's many where we have that ability to move deeply into what we're experiencing, and we're distracted, we're elsewhere, we're totally, in another space, and losing the benefit of that opportunity. He talks about exile, and when our inside world and our outside world aren't connected, when we're not living, from that inside, we're effectively in exile. We're kind of disconnected from interiority. That's what loneliness is all about, which I introduced later on, is like we've been banished from that interiority. We're relegated to, outside of that circle, outside of that space, and therefore we feel separate and alienated from it, and therefore lonely. And so what he really talks about in interiority and living on the inside is we need to move away from that, separateness, not only our own separateness between what we're experiencing, feeling, and desiring inside and what our outside world looks like, but separateness between ourselves and this beautiful universe that we exist in, which we're all intertwined in a myriad of beautiful ways. And the more barriers, the more roadblocks we set up to create that separateness, the further we move away from this opportunity, this experience. And in that I just introduced alienation, which is really the opposite of that interiority, at least the erotic element of interiority. And the world feels hostile, and there's obstacles and enemies that need to be battled to achieve our goals. Like, when we're really connected, when we're moving in flow to the beautiful seam of life, when our interior world and our outside world are beautifully connected, it's almost like things are just happening for us, and things seem, very easy. And I would hope that we've all had that experience at some point in life where we just feel that things are really in flow and things are going really well. And it's almost like, oh, I'm so lucky, but perhaps there's something else going on there. And I find that oftentimes we're creating our own separateness from our world and our experience around us. And we're setting up those barriers that create that hostility, that create those obstacles that really don't need to be there. And as I introduced, like, when we're in that flow, there's harmony and goodness everywhere, and the world supports you with what you're doing, almost as though you're in that right place at the right time. So let's talk about fullness of presence, which might seem obvious. And it's not a quality that's, super different from the erotic quality of interiority. To be on the inside, we need to have that fullness of presence, and they flow naturally, together. And so, being on the inside requires that fullness of presence, which means that you're fully showing up, right? Like you're there. You're not thinking about a million other things. You're having a deep human connection and conversation with someone, and you're fully in the moment. You're not thinking about how you're going to respond or what you're going to say next or whether you like what they've just said or not. Like you're fully integrated. And we can think of many examples when we are fully showing up, and many other times where we're not. And it's really that call to action in many ways is like, how present are you, right? We only have so many consciousness credits to dedicate to a particular situation. Are we using them all in that fullness of presence in the experience that is before us, or are we using, half of them or more, distracted about other things that we can't do anything about in the moment, regrets in the past that we can't change, anxieties about the future, whatever it is. We all have our own mental kind of imaginations and red herrings, and then that's really what we're talking about here. And so, as I introduced earlier, like sex models Eros, but it doesn't exhaust it, right? And when we think about great sex or experiences that we've had in our lives, we do experience these things. We get glimpses of these. And so, how often, are you worried about what you're going to make for dinner tomorrow when you're in the midst of having great sex? I would argue very rarely. And if you are, then I think that's a little bit weird, but I don't want to nail anybody out. But anyway, when we are in these experiences, and that's where sex becomes important, is it can help us understand those glimpses, right? Where we totally lose ourselves. We're totally fully present in the circumstances that we're experiencing. And we're also, figuratively and literally on the inside. So understanding these things and bringing that to life is maybe helpful in a healthy way. And that's, this Mark Gaffney uses the word radical a lot. I think it's one of his favorite words. But when you're fully present in a situation, there's a radical intensity there. Like you're full, all of your senses are consumed with this experience that is happening, before you. You're really taking in, the entire quality and value of that experience. And that's where he talks about radical, intensity. So carrying on, fullness of presence and fullness of being are strongly connected, right? This requires that, how do we approach emptiness, that feeling that we try to avoid typically and fill with what he calls pseudo-eros. And pseudo-eros is obvious when it's addictions or other types of things. But it's a little bit more nascent than that. Sometimes, you talking shit about people, gossiping, those are almost ways, to fill the void and to just create mindless conversation to fill that emptiness, that pseudo eros. I remember when Mark and Aubrey were having their podcast, and there's that movie Don't Look Up, which is there's like a meteor coming to destroy the planet, and at the end of the movie, people are choosing different ways to kind of live their final moments on Earth. And one lady particularly, and the other newscaster guy are like, let's just talk shit about people. Well, it's just like this unwillingness to finally step into that fullness of presence and just to resort to pseudo eros and that trap of emptiness and addictions. And it's really nascent and prevalent in our world. I just got a message from somebody that I think is trying to join. So I'll just make sure. Oh no, he's not able to come. Okay. So let's get into yearning and desire. And so we've talked about fullness of presence. We've talked about interiority, at least at a surface level. And, when you're in that space, we can access what Mark Gaffney calls yearning, which is an essential expression of love and eros. And when we did the chakras, we talked about how in that sacrum, that sacral chakra, through our five senses, we're taking in the world, like we're feeling the world, and we're taking that outside world inside. And with our throat chakra, our ability to speak, express ourselves, share our inside world, is there a healthy cycle there happening? Or are we bottlenecking and censoring and doing all sorts of things to our interior world that we don't want to, fully express out there for multiple reasons? Maybe, we are lacking confidence, or we want people to like us, and we think that, doing certain things will increase the likelihood of that, or we don't want to create conflict, or we want to avoid rejection, or whatever it is, right? So what we're talking about here is similar in that, being fully on the inside, fully present, fully embodying your true human experience. Are you fully capturing and understanding what you truly desire, what you truly yearn inside. And that is an essential expression of love and Eros. Because when you're separate or on the outside, you ignore your deepest desires. You stifle your longing. You're constantly censoring or curating your experience for reasons outside of you, which often turn out to be a waste of time, at least in my experience. And what's more important is that we have discernment, right? Where we look at what our desires are, what our yearning is, and we discern, and we challenge those things to really uncover, to bubble up what the most important elements are. So when Mark Gaffney talks about yearning and desire, which is very true, and we talked about this as well in a previous discussion, is when you truly experience that pure yearning, that pure desire, without attachment to the outcome or the likelihood of it becoming true or not, we're just sitting in the experience of what it feels like to really desire or want something. That can be more intense and pleasurable than the actual fulfillment itself. Oftentimes, I think we would all have experiences we could remember where the actual fulfillment was a far cry from how amazing the desire and the wanting of it was. You finally get it, and it's kind of like wah wah, at the end of the day. And so really connecting with that yearning, that desire, exploring that, feeling those emotions, and trying not to be connected or tied to the fulfillment or the outcome is really important. And that's where I talked about it in G.S. Youngblood's framework for structure. In order to create structure, we really need to understand our desires and what we stand for, what we believe, what we want, and to be almost unapologetically masculine and consistent in that way. And so I just repeated that here just to try to tie those two things together. So what he also says, and this is a quote from Mark Gaffney that I felt was quite poignant in his monstrous book. So I took out the good stuff for you guys. Yearning models a desire of reality itself, to evolve toward more and more creativity, more and more love, complexity, and consciousness. It's the interior feeling of evolution. I love that line. I thought it was quite powerful. That's really what's going on there at the end of the day. Because when he talks about evolution, and we'll get into this later with uniqueness, is that we all play a role in the evolution of the universe. The universe might be seamless in that we're all the same, we're all interconnected, we're all part of this field, but it's not featureless. We do all have this irreducible uniqueness, right? These trillions of cells and years of evolution that have created our experience here now. It's magic at the end of the day. And so we have an obligation, a unique obligation I'll get into later, to help evolve that universe through our unique gift. And I don't want to spoil the rest, but that's for me, the most powerful stuff, which we'll get into right after wholeness and interconnectivity. So reality is a larger whole in which everything is connected. I believe that. Many others believe that. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. But when you look at everything in our lives, in the human condition, otherwise, it's my belief and that people yearn for deeper contact and connection with other human beings. I don't think it's healthy for the human to be alone, to be lonely. There's a lot of quotes in the Bible and elsewhere that say exactly that. And as we connect with others, and this is that reciprocal loop that I talked about, as we have ever deeper connection, we start to feel ever greater wholeness. It's like this reciprocal loop, that feeds itself, because in a sense, we're getting to experience a deeper and newer level of ourselves, our experience, as we truly connect and find that interiority with other, experiences, people, situations, whatever. And that's where that beautiful reciprocal loop happens. And Mark Gaffney even argues that strive for wholeness and connection motivates everything that we do at its fundamental level, whether it's social or cultural or spiritual and creative. And all of these elements, we're looking for interconnectivity. We're looking to connect. We're looking to express and be expressed in that beautiful, reciprocal activity. And that certainly resonates with me, as well. And so he even goes on to further say that it's an essential, fundamental survival need, that connection. And they've done lots of studies we all know about on monkeys and surrogate mothers and other types of things. And you look at the consequences of not having, that beautiful connection, that beautiful reciprocal feedback, especially early in childhood. But frankly, this continues forever. And it's something to really pay attention to. And so we looked at interiority. We talked about loneliness when you're cut off from that inside, and that loneliness and disconnectedness are inexorably linked, and that's why I introduced it here. It's wholeness and interconnectivity is an essential face of Eros, and when we're on the inside, when we're fully present, these other concepts that I've introduced, we are connected, we are interconnected, we are whole. People feel that energy without question. They feel that fullness of presence or that lack of attention and presence right away. It's pretty obvious, right? We do that as well with others when we know that, they're not there, they're not listening. This is lost in a sense. So, existence is that interconnection, which is why Eros says that we live in an intimate universe at the end of the day. And this is an intimacy from a sexual necessarily point of view. This is intimacy from a human point of view, from an experiential point of view, from a reciprocal loop of giving and growing and being more full and discovering more. And this is my favorite part, the uniqueness and identity, because this is the empowering part, right? The fifth face is uniqueness. And when I said the universe might be seamless, but it's not featureless, that's a beautiful line. Like there is a seamless web of that wholeness, but there's still features, and those features are us. Those features are, other beings, everywhere. And when we look at us, even though some of us might not feel unique, and have often not felt unique, we need to remember that we are incredibly unique. And one thing that Mark says that I'll get into in the next slide is like the uniqueness is no accident, and it's not something to feed the ego either. It's a quality of Eros. And there's a beautiful line that he paraphrases from the Bible, and it's something like, God is a figment of our imagination, and our imagination is a figment of God. And it really outlines that beautiful reciprocal loop that not only are we experiencing the universe, but the universe is experiencing itself through us, because only we can have the unique experience that we're having. And if we're all truly experiencing that unique gift, that unique presence, that unique being, and exploring our human experience in that vein, it becomes this, beautiful evolution. And so this is what he introduces here. And then he also introduces, because we are irreducibly unique beings, we have a unique gift and a unique responsibility. That responsibility is to share that unique gift with the world, because as unique beings, we each have a unique quality of intimacy. We can each satisfy a unique need, whatever that means, for us, and we have a responsibility to do so. How often are we caught in traps of doing things that we don't really love, we don't really want to do, we just do it because we feel we have to, and I think that's a lot of people's human experience, and it's really unfortunate, because we're not only selling ourselves short, we're selling the universe short, is what Mark Gaffney would say. And I had to repeat this as well. That unique gift is our capacity to exist in our own experience of life, our capacity to satisfy a unique need that nobody else can do in the same way. We are reality's eyes, hands, and feet out there, experiencing the universe and living our unique expression of evolution. And he also alludes to, like, we're here to write the poem that only we can write, is what he says. So we're here to write our poems, and that's really what we have a unique obligation to do. And just to kind of drive home how unique we are, this is just a beautiful definition of that uniqueness. You are an irreducibly unique expression of the love, intelligence, and love beauty of all that is, that drives all reality, lives in you, as you, and through you, and that there's no one like you that ever was, is, or will be, which is a beautiful thing. And I love that he says this, because it really drives that message home. It took existence nearly 14 billion years of complex and dazzlingly precise synchronicities to produce you. Your cellular signature is the unique dance of 75 trillion unique cells, unlike any others that ever were, are, or will be, in unique symphonic relationships. So that really drives home that uniqueness and identity. And I hope, when maybe you're not feeling unique, think about some of these things, because you are, and you have a reason to exist, and you have a unique gift to share with the world. And that's, what I would challenge you and challenge myself, to find almost every single day. So on that note, I flew through some pretty heavy stuff here. I thought to just throw out a question out there, but we can have discussion on any of these elements that resonate or confuse you, or maybe tease you to ask other questions. But one that I felt was really important was, like, how can we incorporate some of these ideas into our lives to live a more human existence in every aspect of our life. I alluded to the idea of food earlier as a prime example. How are we experiencing something as simple as enjoying a meal, right? Are we mindful of that being an experience of life, one that we have multiple times of day, every day, and often do mindlessly and without any element of enjoyment or experience that we would ever give it a second thought. So I'd love to hear what some of you guys think about some of these topics, but this particular area really, really resonated with me when I heard the podcast, and the book certainly doesn't sell you short either. But I will say it's a little bit laborious. So I've kind of distilled it here. At least I'm your best Shakespeare buddy in high school. That gives you the Coles notes in this particular case. So yeah, I open the floor to you guys. I'd be curious how some of these ideas and topics land, and maybe some things that resonate or might not, or whatever. This is really, there are no rules, and so express your unique beings. Go for it, Ty.
Yeah, nice job, Dan. Thanks. This was good content as usual. What I follow. I know a few of you know I'm into meditation. That's one of my grounding practices that I like. It's been a really big part of my, called transformation the last couple of years. And Sam Harris is the guy that I follow for that. And I really resonate with him. But one of the things he says is that presence, which I think kind of links with your fullness of presence here. It's like we're on autopilot 99.9% of the time during the day. And so one of his challenges in this, meditation starts to help you explore, the isness of the moment right now, which is hard to grasp because you're always sort of living in the future, always living in the past, and calm and connection really only happens right now. So for that 99.9% of the time we're not here, we're just not connected. And with practice, you can start to expand that window. So one of his practices that I've taken to heart is like literally every time you change a scenario in your life, you are about to open a door, or I'm going to stand up from this computer when this is done and go reconnect with my family. It's like this checkpoint of like, am I here? Like you kind of like check in with your senses and sort of ground yourself to the moment, whether that be, and some people have rules. It's like every time you walk into through a door, it's like this reset of like reconnecting with the moment right now. I found that to be super powerful. That's one of my daily practices anyway.
That's awesome, Ty. Even Mark Gaffney talks about meditation, and in many ways, like sitting in meditation is sitting in silence and sitting in that emptiness, and hopefully with enough persistence and consistency, you've realized in that meditation that that there's a richness that comes from that experience that far exceeds some of the things that you may have otherwise experienced in life. And he really talks about finding ways, whether it's meditation or otherwise, to create almost that witness consciousness where you're kind of aware of that greater being within you that is experiencing this body and listening to this mind, but isn't either of those things. And those that practice that you described is really important too. The one I was going to share, which is a easy one to remember, is just that five senses kind of exercise where you stop in the moment of whatever it is that you're experiencing, and you choose a couple things that you can see and smell and hear and taste and touch, and just taking a moment to actually do that with a meal or with anything else brings an interiority and a fullness of presence to the experience that you otherwise would maybe mindlessly just carry on, as we usually do, and we still do from time to time. At least I still do all the time, and it brings you back to kind of that space. But yeah, very, very I love how all these different ideas and concepts and practices tend to have a very common thread, and it's that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Ty.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, one thing I noticed through this talk, Dan, good job by the way, is you mentioned that once we go through the entire all of the material, that we may discover that the actual act of sex is a small part of it. But as I listened, relate to some of my experiences I've watched some of my friends have in the many, many decades that I've watched this stuff. I think actually that sex is actually the hub, or can be in a relationship with a marriage, a very important hub of what properly links all the other things that fulfill their lives together, that they share. If that isn't there, I watched Greg will know, like a friend of mine in BC he and I are very close to the same age, and back when we were in our mid to late 20s, his wife announced to him that they would be from that point on, for no in particular reason, having a sexless marriage. And I watched that man fill that void and not share properly all the things that we share with our partners when we have a healthy relationship in that way. And they are still together, but I think in some ways it significantly numbed both of them, and he's done a significant amount of missing out on what life had to offer, and they haven't shared things properly. So I guess what the point I'm making is not to underestimate. It may seem a small part of discussions, but it really seems like the hub. It can be the hub of how much and how important and to what level a couple experiences everything else.
Yeah, I really like that, Mark. It's like that sacred ceremony that can really pull many elements of a marriage together. And you allude to your friends that are still together, but are they really together, right? Like at the end of the day, how do we define that, or what is that experience really like if some of these big elements are missing, as they are in a lot of relationships, as they were missing in my first marriage? Are you really there? And I'm not saying that you need to be these things in everything that we experience. I think there's a maturity and a discernment and an awareness around, where am I spending time and energy and effort that isn't in line with my yearning and desire, that isn't truly in line with who I am. Like, we find ourselves, I think, in situations where it's like, holy shit, like, how did I get here? Like, I don't really want to be here. And it's having that maturity to acknowledge that and to maybe redirect aspects of your life to elements that are truly in line with your yearning and desire, where you want to have that fullness of presence, where you want to explore, that interconnectivity and that interiority and some of these other elements that he identifies. But I love that you said that, Mark, because it is like that sacred ceremony, and it can be that beautiful piece that ties a lot of this stuff, together in really beautiful, meaningful ways. And Mark Gaffney constantly talks about sex, and how it informs the experience of what Eros can be in life, because it is one of those powerful forces that we all hopefully get to experience, at the end of the day.
Yeah, good explanation on that, Dan. One other quick thing, if we have time, I wouldn't mind mentioning is that I think I've become a lot more sensitive, maybe than the average person, to people being fully there. And what I'm getting at is, if I'm with people who are, be it a little road trip or watching a hockey game together or such, and the other person is breezing through Facebook and stuff, not just for a minute, but pretty constantly, it really gives me a feeling of being worse than being alone. It just feels like that the person there's a heartbeat there, that person just isn't present. And it's starting to, it doesn't matter who I'm with, be it some of the other guys at coffee in the morning, who I even see at another table, or in my own house, I'm starting to really feel a negative impact on that concept. Does anybody else have anything to say about that or experience that?
Yeah, man, 100%. Like, I just had my sister was over this morning, who I see a few times a year, and we're talking about our kids. And like, I think yesterday we were it was kind of a rainy, shitty day yesterday, right? So we were trying to hang out with a couple of people and just trying to find some space. And so the people that came over happened to bring one of those little Nintendo Switches, and we don't have any video games in the house. And I've got a 6-year-old boy, and he got his hands on that thing, and like he was on it for 2 hours. Man, that fucking kid was gone. Like he was gone. And his brain changed and his attitude changed. And we've been like dealing with the fallout all day today. Like these things are crazy. You can run a country from this, but they're like poison. So yeah, I 100% agree with you, man. I 100% agree.
Yeah, good point, Ty. But also, you know, say you're traveling through the country and you're with someone you care about, and there's a deer over there or a herd of elk over there. Pretty neat car in that farmyard. I wouldn't mind grabbing and fixing up. And if you even mention those things and the head doesn't even come up to look, it's that makes a person feel worse than alone, if you ask me. I'm starting to view these devices as be it planned or not, a poison that's taking us away from each other.
Yeah.
And I know this topic's been out there for more than a decade, but it's really front and center for me right now. For some reason, it's as though something's laser pointing something at me, telling me that I'm supposed to do something about it, with not just myself, but with others.
Yeah.
That's a pretty
Greg,
powerful.
you get your hand up.
Yeah, I want to hear what Greg says. We could riff on this technological assault on wholeness and interconnectivity. For they're supposed to be improved interconnectivity, but they do the opposite. But what were you going to say?
He's probably going to tell you how deprived he was because I wouldn't buy him a shitload of video games.
I thought he was going to ask about way more details about your sexual experience, actually.
Yeah, I was like, going to start texting you guys, change subject.
Tell my dad to stop talking about sex.
Too funny.
Those other guys do that.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys know this. I was actually immaculately conceived.
I was
sure
too,
if we've
man.
ever
That's
shared.
amazing.
Yeah, just me and this one other guy. What I was going to say was that I've been doing a lot of speaking and research on mass formations and loneliness is such an interesting thing for us right now, and the human nervous system requires it, right? We require connection. We can't assign meaning to anything without relationship. And when we feel alone, even if we're surrounded by people, when we feel disconnected, it has a tremendous impact on our resiliency, our ability to be in purpose, our ability to evaluate ideas and initiatives, make decisions. It's one of the foundational linchpins that allows us to be high functioning organisms. And the reason I put my hand up is because some people have said that they feel more alone when they're on social media, and actually there's a rationale for that, and it's that there are some forms of connection, in air quotes, that do not fulfill what the human nervous system needs for connection, but they prevent us from pursuing connection under the illusion that we have it. And so it's a real sticky quicksand to get into, because we think we're connected, right? Say online, but the nervous system is starving for what it needs to be grounded and safe. And so we never pursue what we need because we think we have it. And there's a growing chasm between where we are and where we think we are. And it's pernicious, right? It can be sneaky. So that's why things like this, Dan, what you're doing here weekly, are just so massively important. Just getting together, being in real interface with people on topics like what we're talking about has, there's just incredible value there, for sure.
Yeah, even with social media stuff. Thanks, Greg. It's another addiction, right? It's another unwillingness to sit in the emptiness. It's a dance around the void and a distraction that is way more. Well, it's shockingly prolific and powerful. How often are we at dinner and you see a couple having dinner and they're both like on their phones the whole time? It's like it's just really bizarre, human or non-human behavior at the end of the day. But I'd love to hear if anybody else has anything to share.
I just had one more thing around that meditation subject, if that's okay. Was like,
Everything's okay.
Your point, and it's because I just have recently been trying to introduce somebody to meditation, and they're really struggling with it. And she said, I can't meditate because my mind's too crazy. And I'm like, well, that's actually it's an improvement if you notice that. Actually, like that's that's part of the struggle of meditation. But I did find at first, like it's you are wanting to jump out of your own skin when you begin this, when you're sort of plugged into the world, you call it the matrix and social media. You want to jump out of your own skin in a 10-minute session. Like 10 minutes is nothing, and you're just going crazy inside, just sitting still. And to your point, Dan, like after some practice, you do start to connect with that stillness, and there's a lot going on there in that place of stillness. So it means a lot to me. But I think it ties into these other aspects that you're talking about, this wholeness and interconnectivity. When you leave, when you get up and you've been still for long enough, whether that be through meditation or for being outside or whatever it happens to be for you that connects you to yourself, you come back to the people around you, and you want to be around them. You want to connect. You're actually engaged in listening to them and what they have to say instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. And and I like how you kind of went through these 5 steps, because you ended this uniqueness of identity, which is essentially my lesson the last several months has been this understanding what you bring to the table to the world and accepting that and living into that. Because it's so true, man. And when you start noticing that, you notice it in everybody around you too. The uniqueness of everybody and what they bring to the table when they show up as themselves, and they're not tripping over themselves trying to please the people around them or the people in that room. So it's a cool subject.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like material around how we are all the same, and that we're like more the same than we are, different, and that we're all part of the same, field of energy and interconnectivity. But it is a nice reminder that, like we do have this irreducibly unique quality about ourselves, and I like that empowering piece, because to also feel like you're just another cog in the wheel, like, is a little disempowering and could be pretty lonely and alienating as well, right? Where you don't feel that you have a place or a service or an opportunity. And so I definitely, I like that bit quite a bit, and feel that it's the most important part, because it comes with a responsibility as well. To be that unique, not only to discover, and Greg talks a lot about discovering that unique self, that purpose, that willingness to, share that true purpose and desire with the world in service, but that the obligation to discover what that is, and then to find ways to beautifully manifest that in our lives. Like, it's such a powerful thing.
Dan, what about that, or where you guys put to the group, like, what about this yearning and desire piece, to your point, when you're in that burn, that uncomfortable burn, where you feel that thing tugging at you, and it's hard, right? It's hard sitting in that. What's your thing? What's your method to like be okay with it?
I'm not sure what you mean by be okay with it. I think there's a lot of beautiful qualities with desire, like when you really, really want something really bad, like savoring the quality of that experience as like, a pretty powerful thing. I think the burn would only come with, I guess, being overly tied to the outcome and the possibility of not getting it, or the possibility of it not becoming true. And it's kind of like mixing a couple of different concepts in a way. Is that what you meant though? Like, I'm just curious what you meant by the burn.
Maybe it's, first of all, well said. You're right on that, being tied to the outcome. I think you're right. I think that's a big part of it. Maybe the other part is just like, I don't know, you ever sit in a place in your life where you just know there's something different, or something pulling you, something out there, you're not sure what that is, and you're not tied to the outcome because you have no idea what the outcome is. It's just that pull. I guess that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I think what you're alluding to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ty, but it's like when you know that you have that unique gift and that unique purpose, and you're really almost impatient to discover it and to share it with the world in meaningful ways, and that pull can be like really restless and really frustrating. And like where we've been in our lives haven't been that yet. Like we thought maybe, but we're like, no, like that was a total not waste of time. I would never say that. Everything happens for a reason, and we're here now today for those things that have happened in our lives before us. But I mean, I wonder if that's what it is. Like, you're destined for bigger and greater things, and it's more like that impatience of the manifestation of that. And I wonder if that's where you're headed with
maybe, yeah, maybe it's that. Yeah.
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 I was looking for a particular. There was a really cool little myth that he really talked about in his book. Talks about that wholeness and interconnectivity. It was like an old man and a young kind of athletic man, and there's like this huge mountain, and the old man starts walking up this mountain, and the young athletic guy just gives her, like, sheets to the wind, and about 3/4 of the way up, the young athletic guy's just exhausted, spent, like laying down, and the old man's just walking by at a slow pace, and the whole, I guess, purpose of the story was that the old man said, "Look, I am part of the mountain, and I see the mountain as part of me, and me as part of the mountain. You're looking at the mountain as something separate that needs to be conquered, and the mountain is more powerful than you could ever be, and hence you lay here defeated." And it's a really nice thing to remember in life. Like, we often look at things separate from us to be conquered or to be overcome or otherwise, and when we merge with those things, when we realize that we have that wholeness and interconnectivity, we start to learn more about us. We start to experience more of that wholeness that is the gift of our human experience here, and I really love that. And so that's like also part of that yearning. You're just like yearning for deep human connection. You're yearning to like find these opportunities to connect, and when you're in a world where a lot of existence is disconnected, I could see a lot of frustration there, a lot of futility, or whatever you want to call it at the end of the day. But I really like that Zen myth that he talked about in the book. But I was looking for something else, and I'll find it for you later, Ty, but it was all around desire, and I'll take a shot of the page and send it to you. But he talks exactly about this. Anyone else?
Hey, gents, can I jump in for a sec?
Absolutely.
Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, must just be my video that's really choppy, so it's been throwing me off here because everything's
Okay.
kind of glitching, but I'm happy you guys can hear me. Dan, amazing job. Every time I attend one of these sessions, I get a renewed faith in humanity. Just great people, great conversation. Really just a great reminder for me to live in the present moment at all times. I know that's cliche saying it, but I believe it, and I've been practicing it myself. I love Mark's point, and I thought, gentlemen, we don't always talk about, sex in groups, but Mark, you nailed it. You ran away what I was going to actually talk about, and I'm in a new relationship, and since being more mindful, being more present, being more sensual, being more, I'm struggling for all the words to use, but my sex life has never been better. I'm 42 years old, and I don't think I ever truly connected to a woman like I have now in the growth and understanding. So yeah, like a simple way that I would say is like, it's not all about the destination, it's about the exploration, it's about the anticipation, and living in that. And just a friendly reminder to good men that I know everyone's probably having great sex and that stuff, but for me, it was like a light bulb went off, and it came to my meditation and being slower, being more mindful. And I think it just lends to this. And I like that Mark brought it up, our senior guy here kind of saying, young guys, remember that it is the sex too, right? So yeah, it's all good. Great conversations. Just wanted to share that as a friendly reminder for everyone to slow down and explore.
Morgan, I'm curious now that you've made these comments. Thanks for doing that. But I tried to articulate that I think it can be the hub of making other experiences in life more fulfilling. You sound like a fairly new relationship there. Have you discovered that now that you've got that part in your life where you're enjoying it and thinking that that's where you want to be? Other things in life that you wouldn't even think relate to sex, do you find them that they are richer for you as well?
I do, Mark. I do 100%. I get just as much we get just as much enjoyment going and sitting over at the lake and watching a sunset as we maybe do in the bedroom or cooking a meal together. So yeah, I think it is that mindfulness, the awareness, every, feeling the ground between your feet, Mark. Again, a lot of cliche things, but for me, I'm just, and also the emotions. I think this journey for me, it's allowing me to feel more on the positive side of things, but also like I feel more on the sad side of things too. So it's a wider, more fuller experience, I think, is where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah, that answers that well. And the reason I asked the question was this friend of mine I spoke of as example since he was in his mid to late 20s. My advice to any young man or woman would be he led his life with what he thought was honor with that. He had made a commitment to marry this woman, and even though she had said that it would be a celibate situation, he was going to stick with her come hell or high water. In my opinion now, watching that, big mistake. Because I believe it robbed him totally from so much in life that he could have enjoyed out from that hub, as well as it enabled her to continue down a path of what I believe to be unhealthy. So I think in any problem in a relationship, if it looks like it's going to be long term, and especially this, my opinion is see you later. Like find someone else. I've just watched this guy and others allow themselves to get dragged into the abyss, confusing honor with a relationship and commitment with enabling a problem and destroying yourself to some degree.
Yeah, and I think I was on a call with some of my buddies recently. One of my friends is going through a hard time in his marriage, and so kind of you guys rallied behind, and I'll try to tie it into your story, Mark. But one guy in particular just kept going on and on and on about how if he just did, and he had a laundry list of things that if this guy just did this, it would save his marriage. And I kind of jumped in towards the end, and I just said, well, I personally, I don't disagree. You should be doing things to save your marriage. You need to, but you also need to advocate for yourself, and you also need to be clear with some of the things that you're going to need. So I agree with you, Mark. I think in a sense, men need to honor their wives and their partners, but they also need to honor themselves in a way that is respectful. And all I was saying is, you might do all these things now, but if you're not meeting your needs and things that are important to you as well, I think the relationship might die in the end anyway. So just be cautious.
I agree.
I don't know the particulars of yours, but I do agree that, you gotta meet your needs as well.
Yep.
All right, on, guys. Man, it just blows me away how quickly these hours disappear. I took Greg's advice, though, not next one, but the one after. We're going to have another fireside chat, which really gives an opportunity to kind of get into these longer discussions and to share our personal experiences. I had so many things come up with what you just said, Morgan, but I'll just have to save it. Yeah, it sounds like, I just love the value that's created in these calls, and that you guys keep showing up and that you keep sharing, and I'll just keep doing it because it's obviously needed. So I appreciate you guys and your time and your energy and your consistency, and we'll see you again next week. There's another 7 faces of Eros, and I'll introduce those next week. But the meat is these 5. And if you're curious, this is what the book looks like. It's Return to Eros. Mark Gaffney and Christina Kincaid is his partner, and it's full of. He's such a scholar, and he's so learned and intelligent, multilingual, and he writes it in really beautiful ways. It's just not easy to digest. It's not like Michael Singer. It's not very pragmatic, and we hear all of these things, and the reality is when we truly embody them, we realize that it is that simple. But it's really hard to embody how these things are simply said. Feel the ground under your feet. But when you truly understand what that means and you experience it, it's really hard to ever intellectualize it before that, right? And that's the reality with these things. And we just need to keep doing this, and it becomes more sensible when we experience it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. This was great. Morgan, happy for you, buddy.
Yeah.
Man, thanks. I appreciate it.
Keep.
I got a chance to meet Morgan's new lady at the yurt when we did our Soundcraft, and she's just like such a sweet. Yeah,
right on.
I'm just thrilled for you, man. It looks amazing. Feels really good.
It's great.
Thanks,
I'm excited.
guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for your time and your energy, and we'll see you soon. And I'm always available, dan@lifecraft.me, so feel free to reach out anytime. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, gents.
See you, boys.
Take
Yeah,
care,
next week.
everyone.